Go ahead, Gavin.
Okay. Well, my name is Gavin Vanderland. I'm the mayor for the town of Morris, and I sit on the board for the South chapter of the Red River Basin, as well as the Red River Basin executive. And I would just like to welcome everybody to the webinar today. It's really exciting for us to present this and to have everybody on board. Part of the South chapter and the North chapter for the Red River Basin on the Manitoba side, we have put some funds together to make sure that we, with the purpose of education, and this is one of our first education webinars over the last couple of years, the fundraising that we have done and the banquets that we have done have all been with the intention of providing education into the basin. And Steve Strang has done a great job of putting this webinar together for us on the Red River Basin side. I'd also just like to thank the province of Manitoba for their involvement in this, and specifically Mitch Timmerman for putting this together and making it available to everybody. So from my side, welcome here. It's great to have you all on board, and I hope that this is an educational experience for each one of us.
Thank you very much, Gavin. It's Steve Strang from the Red River Basin Commission. I too want to welcome you all here. First of all, I just want to say that the putting together this tile drainage webinar would not have been a success without all the players around the table. I certainly want to help thank the province. Mitch, you've been awesome with that. I want to thank Bruce for coming on board, and our colleagues that are here around the table, especially my colleague Allison, who's worked very hard on helping us put this together. The partnerships to do this, I want to recognize the conservation districts. We have 5 of them within our area. We have the LaSalle River area, we have the Crooks Creek, we have the Pembina Valley, the St. Rat River, and the Eastern Interlake, and they've all participated, as well as the Assiniboine River Basin Initiative through Wanda. We want to thank you very much, Wanda, for being part of this and helping out today. It is these partnerships that will help out and continue to bring information to the table. And we plan on doing a lot more as we go forward. So please remember that the next webinar will be on February the 28th, also starting at 10:30 sharp. So with that, we'll get started, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Maybe just before Bruce starts, it's Mitchell Timmerman here with Manitoba Agriculture. Thanks, Steve. Here in Carmen, and I just wanted to, for the benefit of the participants, especially those who maybe have less familiarity with webinars, make you aware that we'll have a few polling questions to which participants can respond anonymously. It's a way to make the experience more interactive and provide us a sense of the level of knowledge, maybe the level of attentiveness, while Bruce Schufelt is presenting here, the attention of the audience. So they'll be indicated by individual slides, and as I say, it's voluntary. It's not possible to see who's answering what. So by all means, chime in and give us a sense of your learning today.
Give it your shot.
Yes, that's right. Give us your best shot. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bruce Schufelt.
Well, thank you, Mitch, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to give the first of 2 presentations through this seminar, which is sponsored by the Red River Basin Commission, and my thanks to Steve and Allison, and supported by the staff here at Manitoba Agriculture, Mitch and Jackie especially. And today's presentation will focus on the farmer's field and what tile does for the farm, and specifically the hydrology and the land and the crops. Next week I'll be back if you care to attend again, and we'll be talking about the implications for the environment, and as we continue to look at the impact of tile drainage downstream of the responses on the farm. So the agenda today is going to be divided into 4 parts. It's fairly simple and straightforward. The agenda starts with the impact of tile drainage on hydrology, then it moves to the resulting agronomic and soil benefits, which hopefully, if this is your farm, results in crop yield benefits. I'll qualify from the beginning that I'll not be covering significant interactions with deep aquifers and tile, but I will contain my talk to the mainstream type situations, which cover about 95% of the cases.
The first section will consider the impact of installing tile drains as it relates to the near-surface hydrology of the field. This somewhat obvious statement is that the tile drainage changes the hydrology from one of mainly surface flow to one of mainly subsurface flow. As a result of this modification and the change to the near-surface water table, we have implications for soil conditions and agronomy, enhanced crop production, and nutrient management. I'll cover a little bit on nutrient management next week. Today we'll stick to hydrology, soils, and crops. So how does excess moisture manifest itself on your field? Is water ponding in low areas? Is your field have a flat slope? Does the soil fill up with water? Do you have extreme runoff and soil erosion? Is salinity an issue? Does water or saturated soils prevent you from field access with your equipment? Are your wet soils being compacted by your equipment? It's assumed here that the benefits of tile largely accrue on the farm, although it can be shown that both positive and negative changes occur downstream. When pondering this picture on the screen, imagine, if you would, what would happen if I had the ability to infiltrate more water? How do you think that would impact the runoff in the foreground? So let's just back up a little bit and talk about what tile drainage is. I have two slides here to review that very briefly. Tile drainage involves the installation of perforated high-density polyethylene pipe. You'll see a picture of the pipe on the right side with a filter cloth on it. In Manitoba, this tile is typically installed at about 3 feet depth, and the tile will not run unless the water table is above it, as shown in the picture to the left. Tile depth and spacing are a function of the soil texture, topography, the crop, the rainfall risk, or if you want to call it, the drainage coefficient. The drainage coefficient is a term used to describe the amount of water moved from the tile drains per day, typically a quarter to 3/8 of an inch in Manitoba, and outlets in Manitoba can be gravity or pumped. I won't be spending time on design of tile systems, just a little bit on how they work and how they impact the soil and the crop. It should be noted that the tile sock is required if the soil has a significant percentage of silt particles or a lack of cohesion.
So I think the big part is think of it as weaving tile around your home, doing the same type of effect, taking the water away.
Great point. Here's a typical design or tile design from Manitoba. You can see the 4-inch lateral lines, which are a 4-inch perforated pipe with the sock on it in blue, dark blue. These tiles can run up to 1 mile in length, and they connect to mains of varying sizes, the mains being a larger diameter pipe ranging up to, say, 18 inches in this case. This particular design avoided a couple of wetlands, shown in green, a couple of farmyards and a dugout, and drained 160 acres of land at a quarter of an inch per day. The pumped outlet on the top right-hand side had a capacity of 760 US gallons a minute, run with a 5-horsepower pump, and pumps water into the highway ditch and thereby downstream to a nearby creek. This project was in a very fine sandy silt loam and required filter sock on all the perforated pipe. So just to say, this is kind of what a typical design looks like. And of course, now I think we need to back up with to the start and get a little bit into tile physics. And there's some basic soil conditions that need explanation. In particular, there are 3 conditions of interest that drive the water balance in the soil. So starting on the right-hand side, wilting point, this is a point that you hit in a drought. There is water in the soil, but it's held so tight by the soil that it's not available to the plant. Think of southwest Saskatchewan in 1988. I was there, 6 bushels per acre of wheat. Field capacity, this is the soil holding maximum water in suspension for use by the plant. This would be the goal for an irrigation system, to add enough water to get the soil right up to field capacity. This is the point just before the water starts to drain out of the flower pot. And lastly, on the left-hand side, saturation. For a saturated soil, all pores in the soil are full of water, representing a water table zone, and the gravity can pull the water out to percolate downward unless it's restricted below. This is what causes the water table to rise.
So it's interesting you mentioned irrigation, Bruce. These principles are all about too much or not enough water, looking at what the soil...
Irrigation and drainage are a continuum. They're not individual events. Their farms are trying to manage their water. So. Okay, so geology affects the drainage class of our soils. Typically, our tile drainage is trying to target imperfectly or poorly drained soils. Manitoba has a lot of these imperfectly drained soils. These soils are really prevalent in the Red River Valley as a function of their origin as part of Lake Agassiz. Other conditions, including glacial till and near-surface bedrock, can restrict water movement and lead to poor or imperfect drainage. In the Red River, the clay layer that represents the ancient lake bottom is relatively impervious, and it's overlain by sands and silts and loams that were laid as part of the lake process. Infiltration of water into these soils can lead to the water table perched on top of this lake clay, and the water table can approach the ground surface as shown in the picture on the left.
That's very kind of you, Bruce, to include some soils content for us. Soil nerds like me.
I do my best.
Engineers and soil people can get along after all.
Yeah, you had to tell them I was an engineer, didn't you?
Oh, the truth revealed.
Okay,
well, let's hope we keep everybody on the line anyway.
So it will reveal itself later anyways. There's lots of numbers. This slide is to show a little bit about water table versus tile flow and surface runoff. The soil shown on the right-hand side is saturated at depth for imperfectly drained soils. The water table varies, as shown with the dark blue line, and can bring salt up to the soil. If all the
Just a little technical
glitch here. There we go.
Toys, hey Bruce?
Yeah,
nice to have, but
too many clicks on this one. If the water table rises to the surface and saturates the soil, you'll get water running off the surface as runoff. Tile drainage, little orange tile here, when put into the soil, will lower that water table back down to the tile. And thereafter, evapotranspiration may actually take that water table down below the tile. And the action that causes that is called capillary rise. So water is actually wicked up into that drier soil zone and feeds the plant growth.
I think what's important about that is that the nutrients are actually drawn into the soil versus being washed away from the soil surface by the water.
That's correct. So this slide here is a simplified representation of the hydrology inputs and outputs to a section of soil. For our focus, we're considering imperfectly drained soils with no deep recharge and limited lateral flow coming in from the sides. Precipitation hitting the soil surface will infiltrate or evaporate. If the rainfall is intense enough and exceeds the infiltration rate of the soil, the water will run off. Water that infiltrates the soil can raise the soil moisture and bring the water table up near the surface. If we have a tile installed, that tile will take the water table back down again, down to the elevation of the tile. And that's typically what's going on in spring. Our water table is varying between soil surface and between the tile. Once summer starts to kick in and that sun starts heating up the soil and the crop is growing well, we get evapotranspiration, and the water table can actually go down below the tile to the elevation shown in the picture there. So again, just a representation of that water balance cycle in an imperfectly drained soil in southern Manitoba, and this is typically what you would see.
And so the water, Bruce, that's being drained is just the water above the tile. That's the whole notion, right? That it's influencing.
And it's only the gravitational water, the water between the field capacity and the saturation level. One other thing that really impacts the operation of the tiles is infiltration. So the intensity of rainfall is quite important. And this slide shows two situations, one where the intensity of the rainfall on the left-hand side equals the infiltration rate of the soil. In this case, all of the water is going into the soil. On the right-hand side, the rainfall is actually greater intensity than the soil can take in which case you'll get runoff. So in addition to the soil properties, the intensity of the rainfall obviously affects the performance of the tile and the interaction of that tile with the water table.
And that water is going to go somewhere.
Right. So the point is that surface drainage and tile work hand in hand. They're not independent.
And I think it's also important to recognize the fact that that water is going to flow out into the drainage system no matter what. So whether it comes from overland or through the tile system, it will hit the drainage system.
And that's indeed correct. And the change in hydrology, as we'll talk about next week, will dictate a change in the types of nutrients that move off the field and the amount of water that moves off the field. But we'll get to that next week. So the landscape and soil impacts are influenced by the change in water flow due to tile installation. So we've kind of said that. Increase in infiltration and reduction in runoff can affect adjacent areas, reducing water ponding, crop loss, improving nutrient utilization, reducing the upward salt movement with the water table, and improving the soil health within a field. Improved crop vigor and nutrient utilization should result in a reduction of farm and downstream impacts. So as you can see in this field here on the right, growth is non-uniform. In this case, it's a function of near surface glacial till and small, very minor changes in topography, browning out the crop, drowning it out. Tile will even out the crop growth on that field and presumably make the crop growth more uniform, and you'll end up getting less of the situation on the left-hand side where the crop is actually drowned out or killed. Now we have poll question number 1.
Okay, so this is the opportunity for you folks out there in webinar land to show us what you know. Like I said before, it's an anonymous response. Jackie's going to queue up the question here for you to see, and you can respond and give us a sense of what you've picked up so far. So the poll is open right now. And Jackie, just to clarify, should we click to be able to see that question? I think we can if we expand there.
After we close the poll, you'll be able to see the results.
Thank you for clarifying. Oh yes. So why don't I read the question as Steve has suggested, very appropriately, since I think I might have volunteered to do that earlier. All right. So first question, and that's this one here. So let me take I have a little bit of a doubt that I'm looking at the right list. Let's see here. No, that's not the yeah.
Jackie, can you read that question out?
Yeah, could you help us out, Jackie? I'm afraid I don't have. Oh, here it is. All right. So thanks to Steve. I have it here now in front of me. So the first question is a true/false, and so it's in the form of a statement. The statement is: tile drainage targets well-drained soils that rarely exhibit excess moisture problems. True/false question. So I imagine we've given ample time by this point, right, Jackie?
Yep, I believe so. I think we have 84% of our attendees have voted.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like me to close the poll?
Yes, why not? I think that's a pretty good response.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody for responding.
And would you like me to share the results?
Yeah, if you would, Jackie.
Can you see that, Mitch, on your screen?
Let's see. No, not yet. I don't see. I see a message sharing poll results.
Okay, well, I can just read out the results to you.
Yeah, okay.
We had 3% voted true and 97% voted false.
Okay, that's excellent response. And yes, the correct answer is false. And yes, of course, the intent is for tile to address problem soils in terms of excess moisture, be they the prevalent part of the field or a subdominant part. All right, so that's poll question 1. So now that ends section 1 of Bruce's presentation. So, Bruce, on to section 2.
Okay, thank you very much. So section 2 is going to talk about the agronomic and soil benefits leading to the yield benefits, section 3. But for now, we'll talk about what's actually happening in that soil and how it is modified by the addition of tile. So given the changes to hydrology on the farm field, these types of agronomic benefits can and will result. So improved access to the field, lower denitrification losses, reduction in root zone salts, and certainly uniformity production. What I'd like to encourage you is to consider these types of benefits on your specific field. So understanding your own field will determine whether or not tile has a benefit to you. So what are those questions that you can ask yourself and answer? And you can augment your understanding by doing your homework on your own land. So first of all, do you have compaction? There's tools out there that will measure penetration into your field and compaction layers that might exist, preventing downward movement or movement of water into your soil. Is salinity reducing your yields? Again, there's equipment that you can use, and I'm going to show you maps of EM38 or Veris maps that will identify the spatial variability of salinity. Are you having problems with poor root development, such as shown on the left-hand side of this slide? The undrained condition causing poor root development, which later on results in yield issues. You can look at your weather records, at air photos, at crop moisture balances, or simply put a piece of pipe in the field and track your water table. See where it is. Do you have excess nutrients indicating potential low yield areas due to poor drainage? I think a lot of people are using yield monitors now. Are you able to access your field when you want to? What's the cost of that seeding delay? Are you spending more time and money on fuel, labor, and repairs due to wet conditions? So it's not just the yield difference, but it's precision water management. So let's turn to some of the experts here. This is the University of Minnesota Extension Service publication. I've referenced the publication down at the bottom of the slide there. And this, as I understand, Steve, the presentation will be housed online for 6 months after this.
That is correct, Bruce. We'll leave it up probably on YouTube for about 6 months.
So I've added a few references onto the slides, makes it a little busier, but you can go back and then check those references out. Frequently asked questions about subsurface tile drainage in the Red River Valley. And the authors here, Dr. Gary Sands, Chris Hay, Hans Kandel, and Tom Fuhrer, are all extension specialists, agronomists, and engineers working out of land-grant universities in the upper Midwest U.S. So how does tile affect my operations? Well, you get faster soil warming and drying in the spring, more timely seeding, spraying, and harvest, reduced soil compaction due to wet soils, better rooting depths of plants, increased oxygen in the root zone, leading to less crop drownout, and all of those above impact yield depending on the crop soils and the seasonal rainfall pattern. So this Extension Service bases their conclusions and their recommendations on how tile will act in the Red River Valley on the research that's being done in those universities. So they're not just making this stuff up. If you want to see how it looks like in real life, here's a photo that was taken by a local tile drainage company illustrating this process in action.
That's amazing. You can actually see the lines from the tile.
The tile lines are impacted by soil saturation and are highlighted by a reduction in the darkness of the soil. So you can see the tile running diagonally across the field, and the soil right above the tile is drier and therefore lighter. The photo also highlights differences in the topographic position. So you can see in the top side a fairly large dry area that is likely higher topographic position. And you can see on the right-hand side near the back there's some ponded water where water may have run off. Surface water, some may have run off. Maybe the rainfall intensity was greater, or maybe it was some large snowbanks where that water is ponded. What I would say is that when you're designing your tile system, the importance of understanding that the crop uses that tile water, or that shallow groundwater table, is important in the tile design. So uniformity of access to that water is important, and just to kind of drive home that point that drainage and irrigation are related, there's an irrigation pivot that is shown just down on the right-hand side there that actually provides water to this field later in the year.
And again, Bruce, as you described that slide, you mentioned soils and landscape positions, so this is all part of assessing a site to determine the appropriate design.
Yeah, your design is specific to your field. Understanding your field prior to design is tantamount. So we're at poll question number 2 here, Mitch.
Okay, moving on to question number 2. I'll read this out for everyone. Question number 2 is multiple choice in nature, and it is as follows. Potential benefits of tile drainage include: A, more rapid warming and drying of soils in spring. B, deeper rooting by crops. C, more timely field access. D, more reliable yields. And finally, E, all of the above. So the poll is now open, and we'll give the participants a few more seconds to provide a response. And while they're doing that, something I failed to mention earlier, there will be a question period at the end. We'll obviously have to curtail it to some degree if there is a deluge of questions for Bruce, but if participants do have specific questions, they can log them in the question field, and we'll entertain them only at the end of the presentation by Bruce.
And if it's a real important question to be answered, you can always get a hold of us. We'll be happy to talk to Bruce and to Mitch and get the answers for you.
Yes, certainly. All right, Jackie, if you could tell us what the level of response is so far.
All right, we had 92% people voted, and 100% of them voted all of the above.
Okay, very good.
All right, you get an A on your report card there, folks.
Yes, okay, good. Thanks for your excellent participation, folks. And so we'll move on now to Bruce's next slide, examining the impact of delayed seeding on yield and relating that to tile drainage. Bruce.
So with reference to the last picture, you can see that the soil was drying out quicker. Obviously, you would be getting onto that field to plant sooner than if you just had no tile. And one logical question is, what's the impact of delayed seeding on yield? $1 million question, I'm sure. Manitoba Agriculture on their website provides some guidance here, looking at planting date in May and June versus percent yield reduction. for corn, canola, flax, and peas. And you can see yield reductions anywhere from 5 to 30%, depending on that date of planting. And a conservative estimate might be 5 to 10% yield production per week. So let's say your tile drainage improves your planting date by a week, which might be a reasonable assumption. You may get that sort of a 5% bump in yield. So just a simple example of how you might look at things on your own farm, again, taking into account what your situation is. Moving on to the next question, can tile mitigate salt in the root zone? Again, I'm deferring to some experts, and then I'm going to show you some examples. High water tables create conditions for soluble salts to accumulate in the root zone. Yield reductions to your crop can be experienced or expected if the salinity levels in your field climb above 1 micromole per centimeter. And the U.S. has determined through their studies that tile can decrease salt balance in the root zone over time. And I'll show a quick example of what that looks like. Of course, the impact depends on the soils, the cropping, etc. As an example of the impact, we can turn to a local company, AgVice, is a soil company in North Dakota, soil and agronomy company. I've referenced one of their presentations here with regards to the impact of salt tolerance of field crops. And what you can see here, as the salt levels go up, the yield goes down. So by crop, you can see, for instance, corn crop, if the salt is below 1.2, you would expect 100% yield of what was possible that year. As that salt level climbs to 1.5, you may experience up to a 25% yield loss. And if it climbs as high as 2.5, you might expect a 50% yield loss. And that obviously changes between crops, barley being less susceptible, potatoes being more susceptible to salt. Critical first step would obviously be to understand the level of the salts in your soils, Mitch. So.
Yes, and as you mentioned, these data are from AgVice laboratories, so whether that's the testing company available to a farmer or another one, yes, the information is key first to identify what may be the problem, and we need to put some numbers to it to be able to then look at remediating it if possible. And in this case, tile drainage may have a fit.
So other agronomic practices increase infiltration of water, and as you know, as you infiltrate water, that water table comes up. It may saturate your root zone, may cause problems for you. So if we have compaction, people are using deep ripping equipment to move or remove that compacted layer. Some farms, particularly potato growers, are using dammer dikers. The idea there is to increase the soil surface storage of water and allow for a longer time for that water to infiltrate and less likely to have it run off the soil, create soil erosion. A lot of people in that special crop area using cover crops. Those cover crops make pathways and places for water to infiltrate into the soil. And of course, a large consideration is no-till or conservation tillage, which in and of itself traps moisture. And I know, talking to a farmer out in Deloraine, they've moved off of no-till in recent years because it's so wet, right? So that's a hazard. And the point of this slide being that all of these things that increase infiltration without taking into account drainage may cause you problems. Or conversely, if you have good drainage, you can implement these conservation practices. I'm going to now move into confirming some of the benefits, and I'll go about that in 3 ways. The first way, I'm going to refer to a mathematical model because I'm an engineer, of course. These models were designed and tested at North Carolina State University. DrainMod is the name of the model. And that specific model looks at a typical situation such as shown in the picture there, where the tile is spaced a certain distance below the surface and apart, and it moves water from the mid-tile to the tile and then off the field. Another important factor is the depth to the restrictive layer, and of course the intensity of the rainfall and the precipitation events as they move through a season. The model also looks at evapotranspiration and basically simulates the movement of that water table up and down. I'm going to present some actual field data from Manitoba so that you can see that, in fact, that model is a good representation of what happens here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about field investigative techniques that you could use, especially around determining salt content in your soil. Yes, Mitch?
Yes, Bruce, just one quick clarification regarding a model like this. That's, you use the word simulate, so that's the appeal of having a model like this with the available data. A farmer, an agronomist could do a hypothetical simulation, or a bunch of them, for a given field or a farm to get a sense of what potential fit tile may have in that specific situation.
Right. So one specific example of that, Dr. Gary Sands and a company out of the University of Minnesota used the model in the Red River Valley, looking at 6 different soils, so ranging from a clay to a sandy loam, with different restrictive layers being closer or further away from the surface. 3 different locations in the Red River Valley, including Crookston, which is about as similar-ish at least to the Morden area or the Carmen area. And they were able to put in 100 years of weather data and then simulate that 100 years of reaction of that crop and soil to that weather condition. So there's a couple of benefits there. One is the extended period of record, so you can start to look at statistics, averages, mins, max. The other thing is if you've never had tile in your area, such as Manitoba, you can use it to try and simulate what your net benefits are going to be. So, the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things that comes out of that study for I'll say the Red River Valley anyways, and for Manitoba, is that close match between evapotranspiration and precipitation in Manitoba. So in this case, we have an overriding influence of evapotranspiration. Of the precipitation hitting the ground in the Red River Valley, 82% of it is being taken up in evapotranspiration, which leaves about 17% for runoff and deep seepage. And if I add tile, then I just change the balance between the runoff and the tile, but I really don't change that evapotranspiration that much, other than I may increase it slightly.
And I think that's really important. So if I'm a farmer or producer, I can really take a look at this modeling and see if it's going to work for me, if there's a cost-benefit factor and what my yields could give me back in order to cover the cost.
Yeah, and the report's online.
And it speaks to the fact that we are in a dry region, and evapotranspiration, that's the crop using the water.
Right, and realistically, tile is used down east where precipitation greatly exceeds evapotranspiration and you don't see salt, and it's used out west where it's quite the opposite, like in California or even in Australia, where salt is the big problem. So we're actually kind of dead center in the middle of that, and we get both problems because we're so closely matched. So just some results of this, and I'm going to give more next week, so if you want to come back, but at Crookston they had 20 inches of precipitation. This would be the average precipitation. And they looked at increasing that tile drainage coefficient, which is just to say the intensity of drainage, closer spacing or deeper tiles will increase that drainage coefficient. And what happened to the runoff or the infiltration? And the answer is that as you increase that tile drainage coefficient or the intensity of your tile drainage, you decrease surface runoff. So that's kind of makes sense.
Because the water has to go somewhere.
Well, and exactly, they've quantified that where it goes is it increases the infiltration. So you move runoff off the surface into the soil, through the soil, and because the tile's there, you will actually reduce that root zone saturation, and presumably you'll have a better crop yield, and one could argue you might have more evapotranspiration on a field level. So here's what it looks like using that model on real weather data, this being 2010 weather data in Morden, Manitoba on a clay loam soil. And this particular slide is representing a non-tiled condition. In other words, there's no tile. So the rainfall for this period of time and the drainage water and the runoff are shown on the right-hand side, varying between 0 and 50 centimeters. And the water table depth is tracked on the left-hand side between 0, which is ground surface, and 200, which would be 2 meters or slightly over 6 feet below ground surface. So the orange line being the water table, the red line being the cumulative precipitation, the blue line being the surface runoff, and the yellow line on the bottom, which is 0, being tile drainage because there is no tile drainage. So simulating for this particular year, 2010, you can see that the water table approaches ground level and stays there for a period of time, so making it a little hard to seed your crop. And as the crop is developed and carries on, you'll see the water table falls almost to 2 meters over the period of time, that being mid to late summer. And you can see the water table bounces up again to around 2 feet below the ground surface by the end of the year. So the only other thing just to note here, other than the fact that the water table is close to ground surface, because I'm going to show you what happens when you put tile in, is that the runoff is about 12 centimeters, so 5.5 inches, and of course the tile flow is 0. So let's go to the tiled situation. So now it's exactly the same weather data. The only thing that's changed is we've put a tile drain in at about 100 centimeters, or roughly 1 meter, 3.3 feet. And you can see now that the water table varies between the tile and the ground surface in the spring. So presumably that might represent an earlier seeding date, certainly better crop development, and all sorts of good things for your crop. So that's the gold line being the water table. You can see it bouncing in the spring between the tile and the ground surface. And then as the crop takes hold, the evapotranspiration starts to draw the water table down further below the tile. And by midsummer, it's down around 2 meters again, which would be a good meter below the tile elevation. Again, the rainfall is the same as last time. The surface runoff has been reduced from 12 down to about 2. And the tile itself is running most of that water, so in around 11 centimeters of water going out. So that's the change in situation as you add the tile. So that's sort of the benefit of, or how that drainage program shows the impact of tile.
Yeah, it's a good illustration of how the dynamics change with tile included. The water is still in play, but now we've got a new pathway for it.
So after this question here, I'll be showing you some real data that actually shows how that works in reality.
All right, so we're moving on to poll question number 3, as indicated on your screens. And the poll is now open. I'll rattle off the question here. It's another true-false. And it is as follows. Installing a tile drainage system should increase surface flows from a field. So that is a true-false question. I don't imagine we'll have to provide too much more time. Everyone's got their coins out for flipping as necessary. Probably not for most. How is the response looking so far, Jackie?
So far, we have 73% of people voted. And do you want the results? Should I close the poll?
Yeah, I'd say that should be enough time for a true-false question. Maybe a coffee break.
True.
Happening.
That's true, Mitch.
All right, so we have 78% of people answered, 6% true, and 94% false.
Okay, that's a good response. Yeah, the correct answer is false. And as we just saw illustrated by Bruce's previous slides, the dynamics change with tile, and now there's a new direction for the water to flow beyond surface. All right, back to you, Bruce. You have a lovely aerial shot here. Is that the Red River?
This is the mighty Red River, south of Winnipeg. Seeing as we're the Red River Basin Commission today, we have to stick with the program.
Very apt.
Like that plug, thank you.
So this particular field is outlined in red. I'm going to use the results from research 2010 here, just to compare to the drain model and just show you how the water table varies in a tile drained field. You can sort of see the scars from the tile drains there. There was a couple of plots here at a narrow space being 10 meters and a wider space being 20 meters. I'm going to show you the results from the 10 meter tile. That'd be 33 feet. And also just to note here that this particular field had a relatively high clay content, nearing 50%. So it certainly is a Red River type clay. And yeah, so we'll go to some of the results on this one just to illustrate and see the similarities between the modeling and what happens in real life. So this graphic is a representation of the data being precipitation in millimeters, ranging from 0 to 50, so 0 to 2 inches. And the blue bars are the precipitation amounts, and you can see that a fair bit of precipitation at that site this year. And it varied, from dates on the bottom from the end of April to 20th of August here, so on this slide. So we didn't capture the fall. The other thing to note is the dashed black line is the elevation or the approximate elevation of where the tile drains were installed. On the right-hand side, you'll see the water level in centimeters from 0, which is the ground surface, to 250 centimeters, which would be 2.5 meters, or pretty close to 8 feet below ground surface. So, of note, the shallow water table, which is the perched water table, starts below 200 centimeters at the start of the year on the left-hand side. So the water table is being represented by the green, the black, and the red lines. And those are just 3 different piezometers installed into the ground where you could actually see where the saturated zone is. And that saturated zone rises rather dramatically at the start of May and goes all the way up to somewhere around a foot below ground surface, at which time the water table starts to decrease down to the black dash line or the tile. And then as the precipitation hits again, I don't know if you can see that on the user screen or not, my little arrow. As precipitation starts to fall again, that water table was pretty much right up to ground level. And then flowing back down as the tiles were flowing, water table comes back down again, and you can see that water table bouncing up and down. So during that spring period up from, say, the end of April right up to the start of July, the water table is, I'm not going to say constant, but it's just going up and down between ground surface and the tile. So something happens after the start of July. Mitch, what happens after the start of July? Mitch goes on holiday?
Yeah. Well, after celebrating Canada's birthday, yes, then what often happens is that Mother Nature doesn't water quite so regularly.
It's drier.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would put it in a slightly different vein. Prior to then, the evapotranspiration isn't as high as after then. So two things are happening, because you can still see there's actually quite a bit of rainfall, although there's rainfall here. Start of July, there was quite a dry period here. But the evapotranspiration has actually increased dramatically.
So there's a lush crop growing
well,
now.
For sure. We were able to get our lush crop growing and didn't drown out, and now it's using water. So we can see that there's a change in the gradient of that water table decrease, number one. And number two, we can see that the water table goes where?
It goes down.
It goes below the tile. Okay, so exactly what we were talking about earlier. So there's really two periods of time that we're looking at. One is that spring, where the tile is actually functioning and the tiles are flowing. And one is the summer, and in this case, late summer, where the tile really only runs if that water table is above it. So it's only going to run very, very infrequently in very short time here. And essentially, the main user of water is the crop, not the tile.
Yes, and Bruce, you made a very interesting connection with the early part of the growing season by being able to establish a crop well early in the season by reducing the moisture stress. That helps later in the season, because then the crop becomes another conduit for moving water through evapotranspiration.
So it allows the roots to get deeper and they'll draw more water.
Well, not only the roots, but they're wicking water up from below. So, yeah. So. Okay, so that's kind of the local example. Moving on from that, I want to talk a little bit about reduction of salinity with tile. And I guess the comment or the claim is that tile drainage can change the balance of salt in the crop root zone. This, of course, requires downward movement of water. So if you're in a very dry period, you put a tile in, don't expect it's going to solve your salinity problems overnight. So, several examples exist out in our neighborhood. AgVice has done a nice study online. It's available for anybody that wants to go look at it. CSIDC, which is a crop irrigation development center in Outlook, Saskatchewan, has a nice paper out on reclaiming saline soil with tile. And the example I'm going to give you today is just the Quaker Main Farm. So some examples, all of which make use of the technology, the EM38, which is pictured here. It's a tool that measures ground conductivity. And the ground conductivity can be related to salinity using soil sampling techniques. The purpose of the next slide is to show you some proof of the reduction in salt level due to tile, and the impact of salt on crop yield was revealed.
Right, so the EM38, Bruce, provides a scan of the field, but the readings, are related potentially to salinity. You mentioned soil sampling,
right,
to confirm.
There's other things that the EM is influenced by that could be texture, but for this case, we're looking at salinity as the key. So this is a site south of Winkler, Manitoba, and this is the same field. Snapshots or pictures of the same field. It's an 80-acre field taken over a period of time from 1995 to 2011. And the legend is as follows. The salinity rating of that field, as measured by that EM38 and GPS, the light blue is no saline or very little salinity. There's no such thing as no salt. What color would you call that? Green, Mitch?
Yellowy green.
Yellowy green is weak salinity. Orangish is moderate salinity, and pink is strong salinity, which we don't have any of. If you look at the 1995 version, up in the top left-hand corner, you can see that there's a significant part of the field that has moderate or weak salinity at surface level. And this is taken by the EM38 and GPS. Now, as we move through the years, all the way to 2011, you can see that that salinity that was there in 1995 has pretty much disappeared by the time 2011 is come around. And in fact, a lot of that salinity had been reduced by the year 2000, so 5 years, and certainly by 2005, 10 years. But that's the period of time, or your expectations could be that this isn't an overnight event. It's a possibly up to a decade-long event, and certainly that will still vary with time, because you're not taking all the salt out of the soil. You're just taking the salt. You're just reducing the salt in the root zone of the soil. So.
And this is made possible by the fact that salts are quite soluble, and they are moving with that downward movement of water.
Yes. Now, salinity is a tricky issue, and I suggest you involve an agronomist to understand your source and of salts and the remedy to the situation. Specifically, there's different types of salts. There's saline salts, there's sodic salts, and I won't say much more than sodic soils or sodic saline soils react differently to tile drainage than saline soils. You can go online, look at the AgVice presentation online, but just to say that if you're trying to use tile to reduce the salt levels, then you should understand the nature of the salts. And our friends at North Dakota State University have a really good publication, which is referenced at the bottom there, about evaluating soils for the suitability of tile drainage performance. And that publication is related to soil sampling and mapping associated with trying to determine if your soils are saline or sodic, and what the risk that might occur from your soils being sodic. So that's all that I'll say about that, I think. So we're at 11:30 here, and it's cruising along, but I think we'll try and speed this up a little bit and try and move through the yield benefits portion of this. So tile drainage provides conditions for increased yield as a result of the agronomic benefits, so that seems pretty clear. Of course, the yield benefits are a function of soil's climate, crop, and year, and it really kind of hard to differentiate from other influences, but I'm going to provide some data just so that you have a sense of what you might expect, but I would caution that the benefits that will accrue on any specific field are specific to that field and specific to the problems which I've identified earlier and the remedies to those problems. So I think you have to, I'm just encouraging you to do your homework. Our friends at the University of Minnesota suggest that the average yield increase could be 10 to 15%. That could translate to a 10 to 30 bushel per acre corn benefit and a 4 to 8 bushel per acre soybean benefit due to the installation of tile drainage. They also point to yield reductions on wheat and sugar beets. Not that we're going into sugar beets here anymore, but maybe there's somebody listening from the U.S. And for situations where the water table is 15 to 20 inches below the surface for an extended period of time. And they also confirm that there's significant reduction in operating costs. If we move into another publication, again an extension publication that looked at Iowa, Ohio, and Ontario, we can see that those types of yield increases were measured, so corn being somewhere between 10 to 30 bushels per acre, soybeans being 4 to 8, those seem reasonable, and they provide some spring grain and winter wheat yield examples from Ontario. Of course, climate being slightly different there, and the yield difference obviously would vary. One last one on the yield thing, since that's not my expertise and it's not my place to say, other than there is information and data out there. Dr. Hans Kandel, an extension agronomist at NDSU, has a good presentation online that's noted there. That presentation shows the difference between soybean yields for what he's calling a dry condition and what he's calling a wet condition. You'd have to go online or talk to Dr. Candell what those exact conditions were, but this presentation comes out of a tile drainage benefit presentation. So interestingly, they're down, if you look at the mean at the bottom of that table in red, the dry condition having about a 6 bushel per acre yield increase over the wet condition. So some of the numbers keep kind of popping up in around the same. My first exposure to tile drainage was we did 4 sites. We didn't specifically measure yield, but we were more looking at the water table variation and the quality of the water coming out of the tile. 2 sites we did poll the producers that were involved, and these were, I think Site E was a 40-acre silt loam, and Site A was a 60-acre field that was only tiled in the low areas. So Site A, tile allowed me to, this is a comment coming from the producer at Site A, the tile allowed me to get on the field in the fall of 1994 and to seed at least a week earlier in 1995. So again, confirming some of the benefits we talked about. In the 1995 crop in the tiled low areas out-yielded the crop in the untiled low areas by 70%, which just reflects that probably the crop wasn't stunted. This is corn that he's talking about, and overall the yield improvement due to the tile was about 20%. That's on a field basis, of which he was only tiling a portion of that field. Site E, this is another interesting one. It took a while for the impact of drainage to become evident after installing in 1994. So the benefits weren't necessarily immediately seen by the producer. So that site in 1995 had an onion crop on it, and they pretty much would have lost the onion crop without the tile. So pretty much paid for the tile that year. So the benefits to the tile are dependent on your crop, on your soil, on your geography, and what restrictions you're trying to take off of your production situation.
And of course, the other variable might be the weather, just how wet it happened to be. If it turned out to be dry that first year,
that's correct. Yeah.
The impact of wetness isn't in play.
Right. So here's a good example of that. 2016 in Homewood, 6 inches of rain, late May and most of June. And you can see on the left-hand side, these are side-by-side 300-acre fields. The right-hand side was tiled. You can see the tile outlet into the ditch there. And the left-hand side was non-tiled. And again, some of those benefits show up. The access obviously was difficult on the non-tiled field, ruts and so on. Ponded water on the field, crop drown out, stunted growth versus that nice uniform growth on the tile field. Granted different crops, but nonetheless. So just examples. Got, I think, 2 slides left here, Mitch.
The home stretch.
I'm on the home stretch. So
all right, very good.
Back to drain mod, which of course has a yield component, and the yield component in drain mod, which is the mathematical model, and this is now again for a 100-year mean crop yield response, looks at the difference in yield on a percent basis. So the x-axis is undrained, being UD, 1/8 of an inch drainage coefficient, being 0.125, 1/4 of an inch drainage coefficient, being 0.25, and 3/8 being 0.375 on 3 different soils: a Fargo, which is a clay, and a Bearden and a Glendon, which I honestly can't remember what they are, but I'll say they're silt loams or loams. And the percent yield on the left-hand side, which ranges from 50% to 100%. So, and that percent yield is a function of reduction in yield taken into account by the proximity of that water table to ground surface. So impact on rooting and subsequent yield reductions or delay in seeding. So with the undrained condition going from the undrained to 0.125, you can see a fairly large increase from between 60 and 70% relative yield to between 80 and 90-some percent. So already, even with an 1/8 of an inch drainage coefficient, you get a fairly large jump in your relative yield. At 1/4 of an inch, which is typical in Manitoba, you can see that that yield difference is starting to level out because you can't go much higher than 95%, Mitch.
No, that's quite a good score.
And I know that you did that well in university, so you'll know that.
Maybe in elementary school, yeah.
And one would ask if there's any benefit to going up to the 3/8 of an inch, because as we can see, the benefits are sort of waning.
That's right. So it's a question of value for dollar in chasing that extra bit of drainage. Is it going to pay? Right. Is one of the practical questions.
And I won't answer that question, but
no, just a good question to pose. Yes.
Right. So if you want to try and look at those types of things, there's extension material online. Mitch has provided this one to me through the Iowa State University Extension Service. That is a tile drainage investment data manager. So it's a decision maker. Allows you to put in specific information on your field, your projections for yield response and different drainage conditions, and your tile spacing, and then evaluate income and costs, and see whether that's going to pay for your farm. So I'll just highlight that there's lots of stuff online to do your homework. Poll question number 4.
All right, this should be the final one, if I'm not incorrect, Jackie.
I think there might be one more right at the end.
Okay, yes. All right, so we're moving on to number 4, and it's in regards to drainage coefficient. So I'll read that off now. Poll question number 4, increasing drainage coefficient guarantees yield increases and return on investment. That is another true-false question. So being a this or that option, we'll keep the poll open for just a few more seconds for the keeners who are still highly attentive. Now that we're past the 1 hour mark, lots of good material provided. Let's see how attentive the class is, Bruce, at this late stage. So what's the response so far, Jackie?
We've got about 70% people voted. I will show you the results in just a second here.
Yeah, sure thing. Still, that's pretty good attention there, Professor. Wouldn't you say? Professor Schufelt from your class, they're not all asleep?
I can't honestly tell.
All right, we've got the results here. We've got 28% true and 72% false.
Okay, very good. Another pretty good turnout. Yes, the correct answer, we have a popular choice of false as the correct answer, yes. All right, so that's the end of poll question number 4. So then that leads us to a summary slide. Yes. Bruce, would you care to encapsulate all that you've covered today?
Well,
it's just been quite a bit of ground.
It's pretty simple, really. So tile drainage alters the agricultural hydrology, which requires you to look at your management, right? Surface runoff is decreased, infiltration is increased, and tile flow increases. As you'll see next week, nitrogen leaching increases and denitrification decreases. Those are positives and negatives. They're negatives and positives. And the end result can be improved production conditions, including reduction of waterlogging and salinity and improved field access. And hopefully, with good management and changing conditions, you can increase your yields 10 to 20% or greater with careful input management. And that really is the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Bruce. That was a lot of information covered, and yeah, well organized. Thanks very much.
Well done for an engineer.
Oh, if engineers are anything, they are organized and logical.
Yeah.
Right, Bruce?
Yeah. There's an engineer joke that springs to mind. There was I watched a presentation once, and the guy said, "I'm an engineer, but don't let that scare you away." So. Hopefully you got something out of it.
Very well done, Bruce. Very
Yes,
well done.
yes,
Thank you.
and judging by the responses to the poll questions, there's been good attention from the audience and interaction, so appreciate that. And we do have one final poll question, folks. It's to assess how much learning you've experienced today. And so the final polling question is, how much has your knowledge of tile drainage been increased by attending this webinar? Some folks may have come to the table with quite a bit of knowledge already, and for others this might have been their first exposure to the subject, to this level of technical detail as provided by Bruce. So we've got not at all, minimally, somewhat, considerably, and tremendously as the options. So if you'd be so kind, those of you responding, to choose one, and this will provide us a good sense of the utility of today's webinar, what information was new versus already known, and together with the information that you folks provided upon registration gives us a sense of the audience, its makeup, and its level of knowledge. So we do appreciate your responses.
And not to influence you all, but if I get a good response and I get paid, and if not, I won't. So.
Well, judging by the response,
you'll be back next week.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, tune in next week for another episode of Bruce Schufelt. If you'd like to chime in again, yes, we'll have some new material for you. Jackie, what's the level of response thus far?
We've had 87% of people vote so far.
Awesome, guys.
Okay, that's good. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then I guess in the meantime, you can leave it open while I ask Jackie if there have been any questions entered in the question field that's available to participants.
Okay, there have actually been a couple of questions typed in. I will read one here that might actually cover a couple of them, talking about the heavy clay in the Red River Valley. In situations where soils are exclusively heavy clay, Red River and Osborne clays, is there enough infiltration of water into these soil types to enable tile to do its job, or are there situations where inability of water to infiltrate in these soil types negate the effectiveness of tile to the point where it is not a cost-effective investment?
Wow, that's a very well-worded question. Bruce, would you care to respond first, or you may be able to respond to it fully yourself? Go ahead.
Well, I'll try. I mean, it's one thing, a couple of reference points. Number one, the Kelburn farm that I presented was in the Red River Valley and was 50% clay. So my touchstone is always, is the water table responding as you would think, both at the tile and mid-tile, and that's what that graph shows, that it's actually doing its job. Secondly, I'd say that there is soils south of us in North Dakota that are being tiled that are heavier in nature, as there is in southern Ontario. I worked in Leamington for quite some time. They tile a lot of clay loams. In fact, I would say most of the tiling there is done in a heavier soil. If you look at the Ontario guide, there is a soil down there that they do recommend surface drainage only. So it's a very heavy, I think it's called a Holliston clay soil. So if you have a massive clay soil with no structure to it, I would say that's going to be problematic. But if you come next week, here's a teaser, we'll talk a little bit about preferential flow, which is how water mainly gets to tile in clay soils. So preferential flow is through macropores or soil cracks, and it has implications for tile design as well as for management of nutrients. And yeah, I think that's a great question. Those types of soils are being tiled, and the economics of which, I guess you have to look at the cost of the tile, the impacts that you think you're going to see, and what the cost of land is, I guess.
Yeah, certainly as a farmer or producer, we would say do your due diligence, do your homework, and see if it would work for you.
All right, that's a good response. I would say, Jackie, if you would care to entertain us with the next question. I think you said there's a second one that might be.
Yeah, there's actually two more that I will just sort of read together. Maybe they can be answered together. Where is the water that is being drained via the tile drainage systems going? And has there been water quality testing on water coming off the tile drainage systems? Just a second here. Specifically, is there increased salinity in the water in the drains versus surface runoff?
All right, well, some of that material will be covered next week for sure, but Bruce, would you like to provide a preliminary response? There's a lot to that, but first off, yeah, where
does the tile water go?
Where is that tile water? How does the tile system even work? It's got to send the water somewhere off that field, right? There has to be an outlet and a place for it to go.
Well, first of all, as you recall in the one slide, 82% of the water was getting used by the crop, 17% was running off. So there is runoff in agriculture. Runoff off the field, and that goes into ditches. Ditches go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go into lakes. So that's the general hydrology of things. What you've done with the tile is you've changed the balance from surface runoff to subsurface runoff. And you may have increased the overall yield of water coming off the field, but you've probably decreased the peak flow. So the water ends up in the same place that it would, the ditch, or the creek, or the lake, depending on where it gets to. And so that's, I think, the answer to question one. Question two is there salt in the water? The answer is yes. How much salt's in the water? Well, stay tuned for next week's seminar, but I'll actually go into that quite specifically next week. Question. Also a question about nutrients? Or?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, quality of the water, which relates both to salts and to nutrients that you'll address next week.
And yes, the tile water quality has been measured, and I'll be presenting results on that next week as well. So and those are positive and negatives as well, because you've changed that situation from surface runoff to subsurface runoff. So depending on how you manage your soil, that may be a positive, or it could be a negative.
And those were great questions as well.
Yes, yeah, they're well worded and well communicated by Jackie. Good answers from Bruce. All right, thanks for that, Jackie. Is there one more particularly strong-looking question, or is that the end of the questions for today?
We'll do one last one for today. The rest maybe can be either addressed maybe next week on the webinar. This one is asking, what is the average cost per acre for installing the drainage in Manitoba?
Bruce, that's an economic question. Do you have a sense as to what a typical, not so much a number, but a range could be expressed?
If there's tile contractors listening in, which there may well be, you'll please excuse me if I'm wrong. There is no such thing as a typical cost, because that your spacing of your tile depends on your soil type, and certainly the outlet cost depends on whether you're gravity draining or pumping, and how close you are to a suitable outlet. But let's say it's in the order of magnitude, $1,000 per acre, in the order of. And you can go up from that number. You probably can't go too much down from that number.
Okay. All right, very good. Just to wrap up the poll question portion, Jackie, would you care to report on the responses from that last question?
Okay, sure. We had 91% of the attendees voted. Did you want me to share the results?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so we had 2% reported not at all. Their knowledge didn't increase. 8% said minimally. But 48% said somewhat, 36% said considerably, and 7% said tremendously.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, all right. Thanks for your feedback, folks. Yeah, so with the exception of a few, there was certainly new information provided today by Bruce, so we're glad that he made himself available to this effort, and that we've been able to increase the knowledge of tile drainage amongst the participants today. So now I'll direct it to Steve Strang of the Red River Basin Commission.
Yes, thank you very much, Mitch. Certainly want to thank Bruce today and Mitch for their contribution on making this webinar a success. We want to thank both the South Chapter of the Red River Basin Commission in the North in supporting this and by funding it. The Red River Basin Commission is about water management and water quality, and tile drainage is something that's going to be seen by pretty well every municipality in the province. It's important not only as producers and farmers or municipal elected officials or provincial staff that we take the time to educate ourselves to understand what tile drainage is all about and what it can offer. There's going to be 3 more webinars coming up in this 4-webinar series. Our next one, which will be next Tuesday, February the 28th at 10:30. And the topic is how does tile impact downstream environments? And a lot of those questions that were answered or given at the end will get better answers. Closing, we want to say that the River Basin Commission sees success coming from partnerships. We want to thank all our partners who participated in helping us put this on, but also 2 other events that will be coming up, Water Days, which the dates aren't picked up, and Water Day will most likely be coming into the Armor Morris, into the northern area, maybe the city of Winnipeg, talking about a number of different topics such as tile drainage, LIDAR, the Netley Marsh, dredging. We want you to be on the lookout for that, and we hope you can participate in that as well. There we go. We went dull there for blank for a second, but what I was saying is the last would be the March 23rd Fiscal event, and effectively today, I think, Allison, we're pretty well sold out, so that's amazing. In less than 2 weeks, we've also sold the event out. So if you are wanting to go, please get a hold of the office, otherwise we'll miss out. But stay tuned. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we hope to see you back on Tuesday, February 28th at 10:30. So thank you all for participating.
All right, thank you, Steve. That's it from Manitoba Agriculture headquarters in Carman. Thanks all for your participation, and especially to Jackie for making this amazing technology possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, so long, y'all. See you next week.